This morning I had the pleasure of experiencing like a fresh breeze when Venerable Saltram set her motivation. Sometimes, when you're in your own life or watching the lives of others, and especially for me lately with the way people have been talking to each other in the media and things like that, you need these moments of just sanity, I would say. And I really appreciated what she talked about for our motivation for our practice today, and wanted to share this with you. She read an excerpt from this book by Russell Coates and Thupten Chodron, and it's a book about compassion. From the Russell Coates side, he's a psychologist and a statistician, actually, I believe. He's focused on compassion-focused therapy, and from Thupten Chodron's side, she's focused on compassion more maybe from a Buddhist standpoint and how these two inform each other. So as we know from the Dhammapada, our experiences are governed by the mind. So our actions of body, speech, and mind are governed by the mind. And if we have unwholesome minds, then suffering will result. And if we have wholesome minds, then happiness will result. So when you were speaking today about these two ways of understanding our mind around compassion, what she spoke about was contrasting a compassionate type of thinking with what you called a threat-based thinking. And so as we interact with friends and anyone we meet, our families, our communities, and as we have dialogues of all types to try to work on things in the world and discuss things, I think that communication is quite a challenge. We've had the need here at the Abbey to adopt a type of communication that everyone is on the same page with, so that we can make our compassionate and wholesome motivations into more of a reality. And one thing about compassion is it's not really just about our intentions, it's also about our skillfulness. And so this little piece, I think, can help us in that regard. So the way that I think this part is from Russell Coates, he is helping us to understand compassionate thinking is to contrast it with this threat-based thinking. That kind of thinking is focused on ourselves primarily and how we might stay comfortable in any given moment. So then when that kind of self-protective threat-based thinking sees suffering, what's going to happen with that kind of mind is we're going to try to limit our exposure to suffering. We'll label it, we'll avoid it. We might explain it away with our labeling. We might blame it on others, things like that. We might blame the people who are suffering for their suffering. All kinds of things happen with that kind of mind. Whereas a compassionate type of thinking will actually have consideration for the other person involved, and will seek ways to remedy situations and understand really what's going on in order to be able to do that. So in this way, compassionate thinking, when it displays itself, it may take the form more of asking questions. Maybe what we're working on currently in our nonviolent communication about being curious. We're working on our reactivity as a community, emotional reactivity, and she's our coach, so to speak, is helping us to turn our mind more into one of being curious. And this, my mind, this is what this is similar to. So you might be thinking more like when you're what is really going on in a situation? What are the causes and conditions for the suffering that we're seeing? And how does it make sense for a person to act and feel this way? These were the ideas that Russell presented. Whereas if you had a threat-based type of thinking, you would be more judging and blaming. You wouldn't really be trying to see what's happening and why it's happening and what might be done to alleviate the situation. So in that sense, you can see that a threat-based kind of thinking is more narrow It's biased, more tight. And a compassionate type of thinking is more broad and flexible. So we watch our minds go in and out of these all day long in some ways. We can watch our minds do this, but we have the opportunity by living in a way that we try to be aware of these things and seeing the advantages of training our mind this way to recognize these things and work with them. And we can do that in our families and in our communities and in our political discourse as well. So if we're able to have more of a compassionate type of thinking, then we can look at things from different perspectives, and this will help us to have more opportunity for solving problems. That kind of mind, that kind of thinking can actually move back and forth between empathizing and understanding, which we need in order to really get to the roots of a situation, being warm and accepting to the person who is suffering, and then at the same time seeking solutions that are pragmatic, things that might address the causes and the conditions that are leading to the suffering. So contrast that with, the kind of things that you hear when your mind, things you're saying to yourself when your mind is tight or angry or critical. It's very difficult to have this broad mind that can look at, as His Holiness says, looking from all different directions of the dependent arising of what's causing a situation. That's the way he has expressed this. Threat-based thinking, no matter if it's more of a competitive type of thing or a defensive kind of thing, it's directing hostility either towards others or yourself, or maybe even both. And this is where I think I see the role of the impact, I would say, of a lot of our media these days in the people that I personally know, is this kind of thinking keeps people feeling threatened. There's actually in the training that you do to carry a concealed weapon, they actually have a series of videos and things that you train yourself to do this responsibly. But the way they've put it together is also a way that makes a person feel completely threatened. So when they're in an environment carrying a gun, they're thinking everyone else has a gun and they're feeling threatened actually. And this is partly the training that they're getting in these videos on how to properly carry a concealed weapon. This is what threat-based thinking does. It causes people actually to shoot each other because they're perceiving threats in situations where there may be no threat whatsoever. Okay? So it also can fuel negative emotions and cause us to engage in more kinds of thoughts and imagery that are threat-based. So if we have more of a compassionate type of thinking, the mind is more in a place that's in one of kindness and warmth. And then that you can be gently encouraging to others. And so you're building connections with people in a way that can both recognize and validate other people's experiences. And it can help us to understand other perspectives that we wouldn't be able to understand otherwise, because we're not really communicating in a way that is going to lead to understanding. It's just to think about it just with one and another person. If your mind recoils back, pretty soon you're pulling back and you're not going to be communicating. You're not going to be really able to understand. And then also it mentioned that threat-based thinking focuses on proving ourselves right. When does that come up for us? And why would we do that? He mentions that we're trying to avoid feeling vulnerable or embarrassed. For instance, if we were found out that we were wrong. Whereas think of the mind that's more broad, like when you find out you're wrong at something and your mind is in a more, vast space of, say, this compassionate kind of thinking that's trying to understand things, then it's just like, oh, I made a mistake, what can I learn here? Let's go forward, and it's an opportunity for growth. This is the difference between these minds. So one is going to lead us to a type of wisdom based on really understanding various perspectives behind our own behaviors and others. So in closing, he talks about that this compassionate kind of wisdom then can recognize and appreciate the diversity and the differences. And this can be done in a way that doesn't have to threaten our own convictions. This doesn't mean that we're soft. It doesn't mean that we don't have firm ideals. What it means is that we're able to examine, understand. We might even, with this kind of thinking, find that, oh, we need to re-examine our own convictions and make some modifications, right? I mean, we're always growing. We always are, hindsight's 20/20, we're always learning more about things. So it doesn't have to be with a compassionate kind of wisdom. Our convictions aren't threatened. It just gives us the space to examine our own, examine others, look at things with greater clarity. He mentions lastly, it's kind of a nice image, it's like compassion is like a cool jug of water quenching the fire of negativity. And so for my mind, I think more about vastness when I think of these kind of things. So I would encourage people to think about this in their day and in their families and in their communities, and even as you might watch this debate tonight, recognize what's going on with the different people, what the impact is on yourself and your families and our community and our world. And, think about how, if you're only 7 people away from touching every person in the world, I've heard that before, it might be true. We're not too far away from touching every person in the world. Then the impact you make on the people you're around, and then the impact they make, and the impact they make, is quite important. So this kind of, growth within ourselves and within our families, communities, and world, I think, starts with ourselves.